So I don't know if you've gathered, like, basically, I know you're going to talk about yourself, but have you gathered something together to talk about, or are you just going to do like a Q&A?
Um, Basically, I can talk about anything you want, but I thought one of the goals was to talk about my role with the Brooklyn Borough President. But I'll start with a little background. So first of all, my name is Richard Bearak. I am the Land Use Director for Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. And I've been with the Borough President's office since December of 1993. So this is the third Borough President that I've served. I started under Howard Golden and then had a 12-year run with Marty Markowitz. And before that, I had worked for the city's Department of Housing Preservation and Development, supporting the borough offices. And so I got experience working in several of the boroughs. And before that, I got my start in city government with the Department of City Planner. I was a planner for the neighborhood of Elmhurst and Corona. And at the time, I guess I was referred to as a young planner based on my work in that neighborhood. I rezoned an entire community district out there. And I had one other planning job. I worked in the private sector in Stamford, Connecticut, designing subdivisions and planned developments in that area. And I also graduated from Hunter College for urban planning with my master's. And I have a Bachelor of Architecture from the New York Institute of Technology based in Old Westbury, Long Island. And eventually I became a licensed architect. And so that's a little bit of background on me. And I could be interrupted at any time if there's questions. I don't know if somebody is able to moderate that, or if you all have access to the camera to just jump in and jump in at any time. So for the borough president, the city has a land use process that allows changes to the zoning resolution and a few other discretionary actions. So they could range from selling city property, allowing the city to rent property, some approvals. They're sort of a hybrid. They're allowed in the area, but they have to have discretionary review. We call them special permits. So there's a range of actions. Back in the day, really, the beginning of my professional life, but before even coming to Borough Hall, urban renewal was a little more active in New York City. So that's another form of discretionary review. But I help the borough president formulate land use recommendations for these actions. So I can make it more relatable if I know what neighborhoods people live in. If you want to chime in on that, I'm happy to talk about projects in those neighborhoods. But basically, if you think about where you live, where you work, where you go to school, and where you travel, a lot of times what you see on the streets, okay, I see a Marine Park. Actually, I was married to someone from Marine Park, so I know the area a little bit. So if you walk these streets and you see what's there, a lot of times you don't realize that what's there isn't necessarily what the zoning allows. So suddenly you're there 5-10 years, and now a house gets knocked down and there's a 4 or 5 story building where there used to be a single family home. So a lot of times there's a mismatch between zoning and what you see. It controls whether you could have commercial uses. It affects a hybrid use called community facilities, which can range from schools, daycare centers, senior centers, houses of worship. So the zoning affects the height, a lot of little variables, how much open space may be on the property, yards, parking. But a lot of what's built in New York City was built prior to 1961, which is the year that the zoning resolution was the version we're using now goes back to 1961. So you have a lot of properties that don't mesh so perfectly with these regulations as well. And we've had a lot of reaction to zoning. We've had neighborhoods not so happy with their zoning. It's allowing too much development. And so the people in a neighborhood, they get together, complain, get elected officials behind them. And we've had preservation in neighborhoods where we put rules in effect that more closely match the neighborhood. Sometimes when we do that, we do provide corridors for growth. So you sometimes see a mix and match where not everything is all about preservation, but still we want to keep opportunities. The city lately has been much more focused on affordable housing. So with affordable housing, we've brought zoning tools. First round of zoning tools about 15 years ago were giving a developer an option. We'll give you a bonus if you give us more housing. There actually was an earlier version that goes back about 33 years, but that was like a couple of percent, like almost nothing. So the last bonus was 20% of the units. Now we have, when we do zoning, if we're improving the amount of rights, we're mandating affordable housing. And there are income choices. So it affects different households have different opportunities depending on which category we put of what's called mandatory inclusionary housing. So Marine Park, you don't have this kind of development, very low-rise area. Although at the edge of Marine Park, for example, Kings Highway, at the corner of Nostrand Avenue, for example, we have voluntary set up for 7-story apartment buildings where they could give us affordable housing to build a little bit more. So that's a range of a zoning tool that we have. And some other things in my role, I'll give assistance to some of these communities that are dealing with the zoning issues, give advice, guidance to developers that are thinking they'd like to do more with the zoning so they could build more. So these are some of the range of things I do with the office. I'm going to pause for a second if there's any other people who want to interject with questions or anything.
Yes, we do have a few questions that students just populated. So we're going to start up, like one of them is Haley. She has a question she wanted to ask. And, and there are a lot of the students actually have questions already set up already.
Sure.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Haley. I wanted to ask what was one of your biggest roadblocks that you've encountered throughout your work?
You said problems?
Problems or roadblocks or anything of that nature.
So problems, sometimes communities want too much in a way. You may have heard a term called not in my backyard, NIMBY. So sometimes they get unrealistic. When I was in planning school, one of the person who actually started my school, although he was long gone at the time, and basically he was saying, find the edge. If you want to advocate for social change, find the edge. But if you go beyond the edge, you're going to be ineffective. You're just going to be seen like a rabble-rouser, but you don't effectuate benefits for people. So recently we've had a stalemate in Bushwick where the city was willing to work with the community. Bushwick's seeing a lot of small homes knocked down. It's displacing people. So it's really hurting people, families. And the way we get change is to change the zoning, but the city is not going to simply just give you all protective zoning. They still need to help the city grow. The city was too aggressive, but the community was too much the other direction. So right now we're in an impasse. So that hurts because even though we have an impasse, developers have a lot of rights. They're buying up properties. They're knocking down. They're pushing people out. So that has been disappointing that we're so far apart. Each side is so far apart in what they want that the harm continues.
That's great. Thank you for that. Justin Hunter has a question as well. He has his hand raised. So Justin.
Thank you, Haley. What's up? I'm Justin. And I just had a question because I had it before, but then you brought up unrealistic expectations. So like it almost perfectly seamed into my question, which is what is the most ambitious project you have worked on in your years?
Ambitious. There's a lot of ways to look at that. I think when I was a young planner, getting able to rezone Elmhurst and Corona as a protective, first of all, I rezoned the whole community district. Not that I had final say, but I was the lead person on the project. But like I had a borough president at the time, a fellow named Donald Manis. He was very pro-development. So the work I was starting out with was an uphill battle. The idea of preserving homes and blocks just didn't seem to be his agenda. Ironically, it took his suicide to actually unlock the door to the politics. So what seemed to be insurmountable, it's weird how a suicide could actually open things up, but still had to deal with the bureaucracy at city planning, getting my supervisor, my director, supportive enough to get it that this was an important project. So what seemed to be impossible eventually became a reality. And it was one of the earlier primarily preservation-based, although it had upzonings, that happened in the late 1980s, and we had a bit of a trend to have more neighborhoods more correctly zoned. So that was probably the largest thing I worked on.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
Gilbert Brenner also raised his hand earlier, so Gilbert, you could mute and ask your question.
Thank you. My name is Gilbert. My question was, how much of a factor does your other projects play on deciding what's best for a community?
Interesting question. Again, the perspective of community, right? People who live there, that's their community. But yet, on the other hand, the land is also a resource to help the city grow. So I'm not sure what a best answer to be on that is. Give me the question again, right? I want to digest this a little more.
How much of a factor does your other projects play on deciding what's best for a community?
So first of all, other projects become a basis for consistency. So especially when you work for a borough president, it's good to have consistent policy. So if a developer is asking for a lot, we've consistently said, well, even though mandatory inclusionary housing says you got to do 20, 25%, there are times we'll say by past practice, you know what, that's really not good enough. We want to get more public benefit. So having consistent past projects do help influence what you do moving forward because you do try to be consistent.
Thank you. That clears up a lot.
Next is Makai. You can unmute.
Thank you, Julie. Richard, I remember you saying earlier that you got your bachelor's degree in architecture from the New York Institute of Technology. I'm applying to that school for the same degree, so I wanted to know, do you have any advice for me or for anyone else here who's applying to that school for the same degree?
Yes. So first of all, be prepared to give up your life to a certain extent. When you do your classes that, even though it's computer-based now, right? It wasn't computer-based when I went to school. But to do a set of designs, the hours per class time to do homework, they'll say 2 to 3 hours per class for typical. Well, on architecture, it's not that. It could be 5 or 6 hours of time on your own to manage class time. So, and I hope you have success in your acceptance, but so you just have to be prepared. And sometimes it's not about taking a full course load of 16 credits. Sometimes it helps to actually delay your degree a little bit or prepare to go to summer school. I was in college counting summer schools almost 11 and a half years. And by the way, I kind of went full time, but a lot of years I was taking 14 credits, not quite 16, 18 credits, because the demands of architecture, the studio classes, they are very time consuming. I don't know how much the computer age has improved student efficiency. I will say you could probably travel a lot lighter than I did. You probably don't have to be taking around portable drafting boards and T-squares and all that equipment in this day and age to the same extent that when I was in school. And New York Tech does have its urban campus. I don't know if they're still at 61st and by Columbus Circle, but you can only start your degree there. You can't complete your degree there the last I knew. So you still end up, if you're in the 5-year design program, you end up in Old Westbury. So that's forces you to somehow figure out how to be in car transport because they don't have dorms on campus. They do have a 4-year degree option. Actually, initially, I got their 4-year degree in architectural technology, and I went back to school for several years to upgrade my degree to a 5-year degree. But I had transferred. I had gone to Queensborough initially, which is similar to City Tech in downtown Brooklyn, although less architectural focused than City Tech. And City Tech was a 2-year school back in the day. So I was so out of sequence that I was taking first-year classes with third-year classes and fourth-year classes when I finally went to New York Tech. So that also steered me towards getting the architectural technology degree first.
Okay, thank you.
Next, Megan Golden. She says it's really loud in her house, but I'm just going to repeat her question. She said, who's usually the project leader in your jobs?
So in my situation, since I'm the land use director, you could say I am the leader, but I have a very small unit. I only have one person who works for me. Occasionally, I've had access to graduate students as interns, and they'll do more graphic presentations for me. But in my role, like I'll consult with the chief of staff, policy director, make sure there's consistent messaging between all the units, and of course the borough president.
Thank you. Next, William Cordova, he raised his hand, so you can unmute.
Hi. So I could understand that being in the presidential office could have a lot of the borough presidential office. It could have a lot of struggles, setbacks, and maybe even advantages. What would you say be a couple of life changes that you had to make when going into this field? Like how has being in the presidential borough office changed your life?
So first of all, the borough president has an advisory role in the land use process. That changed just before I came to Borough Hall. The borough president was part of something called the Board of Estimate. They were the final line. So now being advisory, we're not a mayoral employee yet. I get a city paycheck. So it lets us be a little bit more of a free agent. So unlike working for the mayor, and it turns out I'm in a book you could read called The Future of Us All. When I was working in Elmhurst and Corona, to digress from your question, I was written in the book as an Ed Koch renegade. So here I'm working for Ed Koch, and yet inadvertently I'm undermining him because I'm helping empower the community. So I'm going to say I was very thrilled when I left the city administration, just as Rudy Giuliani came into play. It would have been really, really hard working for Rudy Giuliani and suppressing myself. So in Borough Hall, for the people I've worked for, I don't feel that I've really suppressed myself. So that's been important. I feel they've all brought something to the table special that created actually pretty good work environments. It's not like everything I wanted to do is what the borough president wanted to do, right? So there are times my vision couldn't be their vision, and you have to let go, right? I also have to admit, in positive light, I actually walk to work. I've been walking to work for 27 years, except for the pandemic. Now I walk downstairs. And that's like a wonderful experience to have such an easy commute. So in Borough Hall, it's hard for me to say, other than resources. My biggest challenge in Borough Hall, when we had the last transition to Borough President Adams, right before Marty Markowitz left office, I had a staff person transferred to HPD. They got to make more money. You felt good for them. I felt bad for me not having my staff. And because of the way the budget was, I was not lucky. There may be other stories I'm not aware of, but I was not lucky getting my staff brought back. So my biggest challenge in Borough Hall is I went more than 16 additional months without staff. And I had interns helping to some degree, but it's not the same. And then we had the massive project in East New York where they were looking to rezone the northern half of the community. And I literally said to the borough president, I'm like treading water and I can't see the shore. And luckily things came together at that point. If I didn't get staff, that would have been a disaster for me at that point. So staffing and, city budgets, that was my big challenge there.
I also have another question.
Sure.
How would you compare the workflow of being in a presidential office? How would you compare that to an average job? Like, how would you say they have similarities versus how they differ from each other?
So first off, borough president's not way different than other government jobs, right? In theory, union employees have a union work week. Although I'm a director, I'm a high-paid union employee. Not to say I limit my work week to 35 hours, but some government situations, when you're in a more of an elected environment, you're almost working at the discretion. So sometimes you could be working a lot of hours, and it's, your pay is what your pay is. You're not getting more money necessarily. I get overtime as the right to take off, but I'm busy enough where I don't take off that much. Plus I get a lot of vacation. City jobs give you work a long time, you get a lot of vacation. I've started in government at 15 days a week. I'm at 27 days a week. I take off as much as I would want, but yet I'm always turning time back to the city every year because of the extra hours I work. So I'm donating. I have over 5,000 hours of sick leave. The city will only pay me 1,680 hours and only pay me at 50 cents on a dollar. So unless I'm in a coma for 3 years, I'm not getting my money back. I told my wife it's okay to keep me in a coma. She'll get a full paycheck. But so I'm donating a lot of time to the city. I don't know how many city employees leave government with that many hours. Somebody really likes that line, right? So I don't know if my income tax when I retire, if I could list the city as a donation and reduce my taxes in the out years. So, with private sector jobs, some of them are very hourly. Some of them you're working and they could get away with, you want your job, but you just work and don't complain about the hours, right? It varies. Young students working in law, when they come out and they work in the private sector, they're sometimes working 80, 90, 100-hour weeks. because that's what it takes. So there's some predictability in a government job. There's, when you're in more managerial, it's less predictable. It could be very intense. You know, the land use stuff that I have, it's time driven. Borough president has to issue a response by a certain amount of days. So it is what it is. We got to get the stuff out there. If it means we have to work extra hours in the moment, or if I have to pick up my staff to do some of her job because the hours are unrealistic, she can't do it, and I just have to step in. It is what it is. So that's some of the challenges with that. And I don't control the flow of my work. The city releases, COVID ended, right? The city stifled jobs for months. Now they all got entered the public process at the same time. We're really juggling the amount of projects we're reviewing right now.
Thank you.
All right, Sonia Gonzalez also asks, is there any challenges you face when deciding what project you work on?
So for us, the projects, they're dictated by what enters the public process. So we really don't have a decision in that regard. You know, if it's there, it's there. If a developer calls up and they need help with the buildings department, you know, we're going to step in. If the public reaches out, they're concerned, why is that building happening next to me? We're going to jump in. So we don't really decide on anything. What seems to come our way is what we do. And, you know, to the extent we don't run out of time, we put our heart into it and try to give people a sense of satisfaction, even if we can't help them. But we're able to give them an air to vent out sometimes. And, you know, sometimes I just have to be blunt with people and say, you know, unfortunately, somebody has the right to do that. You can't stop that 6-story building next to your home, but I'm going to walk them through to understand why that's the case, you know. So, but I don't really get to decide what I'm working on. Just life happens. You know, the borough president has a new idea. That's on my agenda the second he has the idea. You know, so it just all happens, actually.
Thank you. Julio as well raised his hand. So, Julio.
Oh, I was gonna ask, what would you say is the most important factor to you when working on a project?
Most important factor? I think, again, consistency of track record, right, in terms of our policy. But we also have a public engagement process. So in this public engagement process, it provides an opportunity for members of the community, concerned parties to weigh in. So I think allowing that public engagement to happen is important. And in New York City, we have something called community boards. And so typically they're either residents of a community or have business interest. And so again, and they enter a public process before the borough president does. They're first line of the public process. Helping to facilitate that knowledge of the project and helping to make sure that people are heard, I think are important things that flow into the project.
Janet Martinez, she asked, how will you evaluate project success?
So because we're reviewing things that lead to a built product, we may not see the outcome of these things for many years. So a lot of times we're setting the framework of it. So that's a hard one to answer, but like I could think about, for example, I don't know how many people are very familiar with Crown Heights near south side of Eastern Parkway. There was a drill shed that was used for trying to think of the term, the National Guard, right? So that became a thing in the past. The drill shed became surplus property. There were those in the community, especially a former congressman named Major Owens, always wanted to be a youth center. And in my life, it started with Marty Markowitz. There was canvassing of the community, confirming what type of recreation would happen. And, but the problem was paying for it. So the initial idea to pay for it was, well, we need to cross-subsidize it with market rate housing. And that got the prior mayor interested in being willing to make this happen. But then the world changes. The pressure of affordable housing, the fact that people in Crown Heights were getting displaced, affordable housing became important, except affordable housing can't pay for a rec center. So how the dynamics changed, and we ultimately had success. It's being built now, so nobody's using it. But we have some very interesting programming, and we're going to have a swimming pool there, basketball courts, gym equipment, volleyball, range of programming. And somebody is going to be tied to educational resources. So the basketball group that's going to run it, they also have a study program to help people be college ready. So in the end, that actually needed the governor to kick in a lot of money to cover the gap by not having market rate housing. But like, I'm visualizing that I'm going to feel good when that's up and running one day, as an example of seeing a project that, you know, I had a role in an earlier stage of it, and seeing it become a reality. It's not exactly how the borough president envisioned it, but it's close enough. And the way it evolved from market rate housing funded to actually having the governor find state funds, it was a very nice evolution that we could also help the affordable housing crisis by adding a couple hundred units to that neighborhood. So that's an example of a project that it's not there yet, but keep on the lookout for it.
Thank you. Joshua Nunez said, what caused an interest to develop in city planning after intending to be an architect?
So actually, the interest in city planning probably goes back to the fact that I lived in what might be called the super block. I grew up in Eastern Queens, and I grew up in a garden apartment complex that was built where you could say two streets that intersected the block didn't continue through it. So the garden apartments had some courts. It had these backyards with little nooks and crannies of playing fields. And it was great for a kid to wander, 6 years old, 7 years old. There's no parent there. You're out, you're finding your friends, you're playing. And so it's an interesting environment. And then when I was in school, I probably was dyslexic because my son is. Instead of always paying attention to my teachers, I'd be drawing maps in my school books. And I'd be drawing roads, bridges, and everything. And so when I was in architecture school, I had my first introduction to city planning classes. And I grew up in Eastern Queens, like I said, where except for my garden apartment and by one of my elementary schools, a 6-story apartment building, most buildings were detached homes. So it wasn't a very urban life that I grew up, very suburban. And even when I started Queensborough, it wasn't the most urban life. By Queensborough's campus, you had some semi-detached homes, but it's a very, very different urban environment. And when I went to New York Tech, it was an extremely suburban environment. I was driving to school on some of these back roads, and there was polo being played and estates, and you'd be driving on roads that the trees would make like cathedrals with the sun bursting through. So it was far, far from an urban environment. But in the city planning classes, there's a neighborhood in Staten Island that was an early attempt in the United States as a planned community, Radburn, Long Island. And it was built where the community was a super block. The streets would be these little dead ends with cul-de-sacs, and children would go to school and they wouldn't even have to cross the street. It'd be like if you go to Central Park or Prospect Park, where there's like roads going above or below, footpaths. So that's what Radburn had. And it was a nice introduction to me. And but then when I had these city planning classes, it started changing me. And I have to say, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, 80 years ago, 90 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 400 years ago, 500 years ago, 600 years ago, 700 years ago, 800 years ago, 900 years ago, 1000 years ago, 2000 years ago, 3000 years ago, 4000 years ago, 5000 years ago, 6000 years ago, 7000 years ago, 8000 years ago, 9000 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 400 years ago, 500 years ago, 600 years ago, 700 years ago, 800 years ago, 900 years ago, 1000 years ago, 2000 years ago, 3000 years ago, 4000 years ago, when I went to Hunter College, they have dorms, and I was lucky enough my second semester to get into dorm, and it gave me a very urban life. I was living on 23rd between First and the river, and it really was transformative in terms of the neighborhoods I would get to see. Because for me as a kid, a lot of the city was, I'd be taking the Belt Parkway to drive my way to friends who moved to New Jersey or whatever. I didn't really understand the city the same way. So even my early interest in urban planning has evolved a lot because of neighborhoods that I've suddenly had a chance to learn. And like since I've left Eastern Queens, and I lived in Glen Oaks Village also, which is a very large super block of garden apartment. It's like probably 6 or 8 super blocks. So that was also part of my growing up. I got to live in neighborhoods like the West Village, the Village, before moving out. I'm in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn now. So my exposure has become more rooted as I've grown up even, and including my planning career. Because my first job was designing subdivisions, so it was more akin to my Eastern Queens kind of and New York Tech campus kind of college exposure. So it's urban planning been first it was more city planning, regional planning, but it's really been an evolution for me. It still is an evolution for me as I get to see neighborhoods, including other countries, other cities.
That's great. Oh, Yufeng, he raised his hand as well, so Yufeng, you could go.
By the way, I'm not a beach person. I like my travel. I love to go into cities, walk streets, and just see things.
That's cool.
I do go to the beach though.
Hello, you think? So I heard you went for architectural technology. How do you think your life would have changed if you actually continued and go on the path that relates to that degree?
So one thing about architecture, not everybody's the designer. I worked for one architectural firm, which was actually an architectural engineering firm. And I worked for a life insurance company, MetLife, doing interior partition designing before I got the job with the architects. So I think I would not have birthed into becoming the level of creativity. One architect jokingly talked about you could work for a firm that builds schools and you're going to detail stairways your whole career, or you're going to be designing toilet, restrooms or whatever. You could get pigeonholed sometimes into what you do, but you may rarely evolve to be the designer. In fact, it was stated actually when I was in planning school by a renowned urban planner named Jonathan Barnett, that successful planners, and it also goes to successful architects, although there are deviations, you either come from a family of architects, you come from money, you married into money because you need somebody to seed that project for you to get the commission. So it's really hard to become the one. You could take a chance and you do a lot of competitions and you hit. There was an architect working for the City Housing Authority. He had a winning proposal related to the World Trade Center with the fountain that's there, right? Changed his life, made him a little bit more of a commodity. I don't know what's happened to him since. There was a young student, can't remember if she went to Columbia, named Maya Lin. She won the competition for the Vietnam Memorial, right? If that didn't happen to her, would she have had the same pathway in her career? So that's the thing with architecture. You might work for a firm and it's small and you get to do a lot of things and you work your way up and you evolve. And there's a movement now called Passive House. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but you're building a very tight building envelope and it's very energy efficient. So maybe because of time of your life, maybe that would have meshed with me, and you become an expert in something, you become a commodity to your architectural firm, maybe you would have been just writing specifications for a job. Sometimes it's being out in the field. When I mentioned architectural technology, one of the things New York Tech did was they taught us to be construction managers. So you're not actually being an architect. You're going out, you're inspecting the progress of the building site. In fact, one of the assignments I had was to go to a construction site, go a few times and get access. So, you meet the foreman at a job, you explain you're a student, and they're great to you. And I was able to walk in, and each week I'd go check the progress on a job. And, would that have been a pathway for me? Sometimes you need the right personality. I don't see me a certain way as being a heavy, forceful, yell at that contractor, rip out your work kind of thing. I don't think that would have been a good fit for me, but some people that's a great fit for. So I'm glad my path deviated. I think I would have been a run-in-the-mill person within the scheme of architecture. I thought I was pretty good at putting together floor plans. I think my elevations lacked vision.
Okay, thank you. That was really interesting.
That's good.
Dimitri Brown raised his hand as well.
Yeah, I had a question. So I believe you worked with landmarks, if I'm not mistaken. And the question that I had was, as an urban planner, which type of projects do you enjoy working on the most, housing or landmarks?
So landmarks is a small part of the role for the borough president. In New York City, landmarks are governed by the Landmarks Preservation Commission, and they happen because property ends up in a historic district or it's designated an individual landmark. And so the role we have is really technical support. We don't have a role in reviewing a landmark building or approving a landmark neighborhood, but we'll help people advocate or give guidance. Some people who want to help formulate how they comment to try to influence the commission. Don't let that giant lawn go away. We love that lawn that surrounds this building. This is a real case in Crown Heights North right now. I'll give them some feedback on how they may try to make a case, but that's as far as it goes with landmarks for me in terms of borough president's office. Actually, most people in planning fields, there's only a handful that get themselves that tight with landmark buildings. Give me the other part of the question again.
Yeah, so the other part was
housing. You mentioned housing.
Oh yeah, housing. Yeah.
This is a great part. So first of all, when I started in Borough Hall, there was not much housing development in New York City. So in the 90s, when I worked in Elmhurst Corona for city planning, we were getting a lot of 3-story row houses that were, of course, upsetting people because they were knocking down perfectly sound detached homes. But New York City was still not a strong market rate place. So that dynamic was starting to change, but affordable housing, if the city wasn't paying for it, it wasn't happening. And there wasn't a lot of money. With Ed Kachi, started fixing up abandoned buildings. One of my roles as an intern with Bronx City Planning while I was going to Hunter, we were helping to figure out where it would be good to put silk screen in the windows of these abandoned buildings so the people wouldn't be stripping the iron valuable pipes and whatever from the buildings, right? So I doubt the students here would be old enough, but maybe some of the faculty, they might remember going up the Major Deegan or Cross Bronx Expressway, and you'd be seeing these buildings with like flower pots, but they were fake. They were stencils, right? So that was one of my assignments, actually. The like affordable housing then was like, let's not have our buildings vandalized more. So when we have the money, we could fix them up. So housing's developed a lot. So under Howard Goldman, it was like, can we induce market rate housing? And one of the things that was happening at the very end of my time with Howard Goldman, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Brighton Beach. There used to be bath clubs on Coney Island Avenue and Brighton Beach. And now you have towers, 12-story towers there. And just getting confidence in a builder to build bigger, denser, was not an easy thing to do. In fact, the developer got a flex program. He didn't even know the banks would lend them for those 12-story buildings. And he built one at a time because it was too much to get funding for. So under Bloomberg, economy is getting stronger, and the affordable housing movement, because people are starting to get displaced a little bit. And so basically the idea of affordable housing with Marty Markowitz, we responded to a rezoning in Park Slope. In 4th Avenue, if people walk from Atlantic Avenue to around 23rd Street, you're going to see a bunch of 12-story buildings there now. So as part of the approval process, we said, you know what? 20% of those buildings should be affordable. And it wasn't even going to be very affordable. It was going to be like middle income affordable, upper middle income affordable, because there was no subsidy. And the city planning commissioner at the time, the chair, she did a press conference and it was like, anybody against this plan, it would be criminal to be against this plan. So that was the day I earned my stripes, because we were not fully in support because her plan didn't have affordable housing, but it got adopted. But the next time the city had a big proposal, not too far from where you all are attending class, Williamsburg, Greenpoint, industrial areas, including the waterfront. So we said there should be an opportunity for affordable housing. And while it wasn't mandatory, we got a bonus adopted. The city started the project with no plans for bonus, and we were very influential to help the city council member. They delivered this project with the affordable housing bonus and with some other rules that former state assembly member Vito Lopez passed away recently. He tied some tax benefits to you got to provide the affordable housing. So we actually have a lot of affordable housing units on the waterfront, some of them with waterfront views even on the lower floors, of course, not the highest floors. But so we've got a couple of thousand units already of affordable housing in Williamsburg and Greenpoint because of that movement. That was voluntary, right? The advocates wanted more. They wanted mandatory. So now we have the mandatory affordable housing, which is part of the housing movement. But the affordable housing bonus also allows preservation of existing buildings. The new bonus does not allow that. I'm not too happy about that. As much as I'm a development kind of guy, if you could keep people in their homes, that's the best kind of affordable housing. So I really was disappointed that the new bonus doesn't allow a developer the option of building 100% market rate housing and yet take a building nearby and make sure it stays permanently affordable. I think there's an equity question. I'm going to use a blunt term called poor door. Some of the affordable housing is built with a separate door for the affordable housing. So it's not a wonderful connotation, but to me, if I could keep people from being displaced, because once you're displaced, if you do a city lottery, if you don't have the right income, number one, lottery is not good for you. Number two, you got to be selected. If they don't pull your name out of the hat, then you're just displaced, and it's sometimes you end up in a shelter, and that's a horrible situation. We got too many kids in our Department of Education school system that are homeless. We have statistics in some of our projects. So one of the things also, I told you, the affordable housing, you have to have the right income. You earn $1 too much, $1 too little, that apartment's not available to you. Well, one of the policies I crafted for the borough president, which is not official city policy yet, but I'd like it to be city policy. If you are paying $1,000 a month in rent, and that affordable housing is $900, even if you don't have enough income based on the lottery, you should still be allowed to lower your rent $100. It still may be more rent than you'd rather pay, than you could really afford to pay, means you don't have much money for clothing and whatever else. But if we could give you a chance to lower your rent $100, why are we denying that to people? So that's another housing thing we'd like to see evolve. When I mentioned homeless students, some of these kids travel a really far way to go to school. Their shelter may be in the Bronx, their school might be in Brooklyn. And if there's affordable housing being built near their school, why can't their family get local preference and be allowed to apply? Like if you live in a neighborhood, we give you a 50% chance. Well, I shouldn't say 50%. Half the units would go to people living in a neighborhood if they have the right income. The rest are opened up wider. Well, if I'm going to a school there, why can't my family that's in a shelter in the Bronx have a right? Because people in shelters, some of them actually have jobs, some of them have incomes. So sometimes the lotteries could be affordable enough. So if that child has a chance to shorten their commute and go to school in the same neighborhood of where they're housed, that would be a wonderful thing. Another thing with housing, we've been pushing with Borough President Adams family size units. Developers like to build studios and 1-bedrooms because they rent them out to make more money that way. The city likes to count units. So sometimes it's not about who's benefiting from the units. We'd rather build less units if we could use the same space to squeeze in families instead of squeezing in more apartments. So we've been pushing more 2- and 3-bedroom units to be part of this. So that in the evolution of housing policy, it evolved a bit more under Marty Markowitz, and it's evolved that much more working under Eric Adams. Hard for me to think of how much more creativity I could come up with in the years ahead. We really feel we've been pushing the envelope. City-owned properties, some of them are underbuilt, right? So in a neighborhood in Sunset Park and in downtown Brooklyn, we rebuilt the libraries, made them better, I believe. Some will disagree. But we've fully built out the property to create value. In Sunset Park, we got affordable housing built above the library. If you're down around 52nd Street and 4th Avenue, you can see that building. Downtown Brooklyn, there's a tower. The tower doesn't have affordable housing, but off-site in Clinton Hill, it's got over 100 affordable housing units. And the money didn't just go to the city, it's being earmarked to the library system. So we're fixing up about 4 other libraries along the way, because too often libraries don't get funded fast enough. So I know that's not a housing question, but using our city sites to build housing, we're advocating for using parking lots. I don't know if any of you live out in East New York. Along the Conduit, if you're ever out that way, the A&C train have a station there at Grant Avenue. There's parking lots above. We're going to use those parking lots. We're going to have manufactured housing built right in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And that'd be a great field trip for you guys to get in there to see them build that. Not too far from the school. And we'll have some affordable housing built. There may still be some commuter parking there, but we're going to use the land, the parking lot as a resource. So we're trying to push that out in Brighton Beach, Sheepshead Bay. We've started having a conversation, not overly public yet. It's public talking to you, but so these are ideas. We've been talking about, the mayor talked about building over Sunnyside Yards to deck. Borough President Adams put out the idea of building over the Sunnyside Yard, not Sunnyside, sorry, the Coney Island Yards, the yards in Sunset Park along 38th Street, out by Broadway Junction, building over the yards there where the L trains are, J and Z, right? These are areas that we could try to get affordable housing. It's expensive because we're decking, but it's still an opportunity. So we're looking to see, as we run out of city-owned land, there was an era not too long ago, nobody thought you'd run out of city-owned land, but we are getting that point, how to be creative to build more housing. And that's a very big initiative, affects everybody.
Diamond Jefferson, she asks, do you have any future projects?
They're ongoing. So what I have before me now, we're due next week. If you wander around Dumbo, there are scattered pieces of city-owned land under the bridges they're used either directly for the Department of Transportation or they're used for contractors working on the nearby roads and bridges. So the city, to unlock the land, would like to sell to the property owner next door. So we're not literally selling the land, we're selling the development rights, the volume you could build there. So we have to weigh in next week to see if that's a good idea to do that. And the city gets money out of it. And then the question becomes, well, what do you do with the money? Does it just go to the general fund and get spent anywhere in the city? Does it become a resource for the local community? If you've been in an area, if you've ever come out of the York Street train station, it's a long dead end to get out there. Back in the day, there was few bodies going in and out of it because not many jobs there, not many housing there. There's a boom of development in Dumbo and Vinegar Hill, and still ongoing. And if you walk over the bridge, you could see tremendous development. Well, now that train station is packed. I just saw a video a couple months ago. People couldn't even get into station a particular day because it just was so jam-packed. So it will be an interesting question to see whether we think it's a good idea because of congestion, or if it's a good idea, what should happen with the money. That's a project I have. I have a lot of stuff that's industrial related. One, not too far from your school, if you want to do a field trip and give your thoughts. If you walk up, there's a place called Acme Fish, giving you a side assignment if your teachers think it's appropriate. There's a one-story fish factory, as well as a few other warehouses there. The city, Acme Fish needs to expand, to grow, but it's too expensive. So they want to leverage the office market, and there's a project nearby called 25 Kent that you go see. That's kind of like two buildings that have a corridor in the middle, a nice open space, and then it joins above, right, to be one building, 9-story building there. And so similar kind of concept. They want to build taller than that building even. They want to build 175 feet high, which is 9 stories, because office floors can have high floor and ceiling heights. And fish production, you need space, right? But if you walk a block or two in a couple different directions, you get near homes. People who live in those homes, they like the low-rise life they have around them. So we have to weigh in. Do we want to help Acme Fish stay in the neighborhood? Good jobs for people with not a lot of education, a lot of non-English speaking people working there, right? So it's an easier pathway for employment. So those jobs serve a purpose. But to make the economics work, because you can't really build over the new fish factory the way the ventilation works, we got to have a tall building. So are there ways to play with the building the way the developer showed it? Can you do something to make it less, I'll say, in your face to the people who live north and east of it? This is up between, I believe it's Norman and I'm trying to think of the street to the north, Meserole. So Meserole, Norman, Banker, and one other street. So it's an interesting project to think about it urbanistically. Like, is it possible to play it all with what the developer's showing how they do the building to try to make it tolerable or less offensive to the people who live nearby? So maybe there's no solution, but if we make the building smaller, we can't subsidize the rebuilding of a $40 million Acme Fish. So we're basically telling Acme Fish, take your jobs to North Carolina if we don't allow this to be built. So that's an assignment I have before me. If people live or know the northern part of Bushwick, there's a street called Sidham. I think the site I have is off of Knickerbocker. They want to build a little bit more industrial space, but they wanted to build housing to cross-subsidize it. Because of reaction to market rate housing, they're finding a way to do it as affordable, but it's at different degrees of affordable. For Bushwick, maybe a quarter of the units would be affordable for a lot of the core residents, not the people who've been moving in the last 5 years or so. So is that affordable enough? Is there some creative solutions we could have there for the industrial tenants that exist today and for the new space that would get built? Does it just become office jobs, techie jobs, or can we keep it to be makerspace? Makerspace to me means garment jobs, making jewelry, making lamps, woodworking, because again, there are people, they could be very creative, but they're not earning master's degrees necessarily, or just even if they could earn a master's, they really like that artistic sense about themselves. So how do we keep places for jobs like that in New York City? I've got another one by the Gowanus Canal. There's parking regulations in manufacturing areas. They're either very suburban or there's no requirement. This fellow's got a very suburban lot. You can't make the economics work by fitting surface parking. You do surface parking, you got to put the building up on stilts, which is an added cost. Or you got to do garages to use all the rights, and that's very expensive. So the person's asking to have no parking requirement. And for doing that, do we let them just build an office building, or do we try to preserve some of the rights for these maker spaces? So that's another thing I have before me. There's a big project being proposed around the Gowanus Canal. It's been talked about to allow residential for a lot of years. So it's kind of the blocks from Bond Street going out to 4th Avenue, even though not all the blocks line the canal, pretty much north of 3rd Street, if people are familiar where Whole Foods are off of 3rd Avenue. So the city's proposing to make most of this residential with an affordable housing requirement, the standard housing requirement. 4th Avenue, they want to change the 12-story zoning to 17 stories. There are still little houses near 4th Avenue. Some of them, people in our little houses didn't love the 12-story buildings. Will they be happy with the 17 option? Because the 12 doesn't come with affordable housing. There's a large former gas plant. Back in the day, they turned coal into gas, right? So created a very toxic environment for the land. Gowanus Canal gets some of that. It's called coal tar. Some of that has been migrating into and below the Gowanus Canal and a lot of the properties there. So that property ended up in the public domain, and it's slated to become mostly affordable housing with land set aside for a school with no guarantee that the city comes through with the money to build a school, and also some land for a waterfront park, although the park gets delayed because we got to use it as a staging area to clean up the canal, because it's going to take a long time, probably a 15-year process, I guess, to clean up the canal. So they need upland areas to help remove the gook that's below. So that's going to be a very, very involved project for me. I'll be working very intensely on it in the months of it goes public January 19th, so through probably the end of April, that'll be a very big assignment for me. I almost had an assignment near the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens. Somebody wanted to build 38-story towers, and they had a social basis despite what people think. They wanted half the units to be affordable. 30% would be middle income, 20% be lower income, 50% market rate. They needed a lot of development rights to make this work. But their building was going to cause a shadow on the botanical gardens, and there's a belief that it would damage botanical gardens inventory. Mayor just made a announcement that this project should not move ahead. So I don't know if this will ever be in my work plan because of that. But that was getting very close to being in front of me as a project. So those are some of my near-term projects. Also some very small projects on affordable housing, scattered sites in East New York, be all fairly low income to maybe moderate income, if that's approved. and the city projects tend to be rental. In a few cases, they are affordable home ownership projects. Going back to housing philosophy, by the way, when it comes to home ownership projects, I've been helping borough presidents with the image of affordable forever. If you get a city home to own, after a certain number of years, you own it clean. You don't even owe the city some of the money that went to make that happen, right? Subsidy on land. City might put 150, 200,000 of subsidy to build that home. You live there 10 years, 15 years, you owe the city nothing. So what happens to the next generation of people who need affordable housing? So that's why the idea of keeping those homes permanently affordable, that if you're a moderate income family, you should sell it to another moderate income family. You're still making some profit because every time you pay the bank, you're paying some principal down. So principal is forced savings. So that's good. That's money back in your pocket when you sell the home. So also the home will grow a little bit in value, but you don't make a windfall. You're not a lottery winner. People who have gotten homes for the city since they've started a homeowners program in the early 1980s, they're lottery winners. Some of them making hundreds of, not millions of dollars. And then the next generation doesn't have the opportunity to have those homes. So point that out. Some of the other little things I have McDonald's in Coney Island. It's a drive-through. Drive-through is not allowed there unless they get a special permit every 5 years. They want to stop getting a special permit. So if we change the zoning, then they're good. The drive-through is good and it's clean and they never have to go back every 5 years to renew the permit. That's a little thing that I work on. It gives you a little range of the type of things I have ahead of me. A newer thing the city just put on the table is hotels. Right now in the city, unless you're in a manufacturing district, you could build a hotel as of right in commercial districts, higher commercial districts, and what I call automotive districts. So automotive districts might be known for gas station, car repair, but they could also have retail, might have storage facilities. So those are places hotels go as right. There's consideration to not allow hotels as a right anymore in New York City. They should require this extra layer of review. So this does not include homeless shelters. Homeless shelter hotels can still be built as of right in any areas that hotels say could be built. So that's going to be something I'm going to be monitoring over the months ahead, and eventually that will be probably summer into the fall where the borough president be asked to take a position if that's a good idea or not. So those are some of the things on the horizon for projects for me.
Thank you for that. Myra Gomez had a question as well, saying, how do you organize your time efficiently while working?
So for my work purposes, this is not an efficient use of my time, but this is a wonderful use of my time. Hopefully there may be some subtle influence in your life moving forward that this was a great use of my time, but it doesn't help my deadlines. You know, that's a challenge, right? The work that gets buried sometimes is my learning part of my job. And sometimes learning is like reading articles to learn how neighborhoods feel about things, or learning about where developers are moving projects. So those are the type of things I have to find voids in my life to keep up on. So, you know, and it is what it is. If I work a little extra, it is what it is. So I you know, it's hard because if I get a phone call, I'm not going to rush somebody off the phone because I've got work that's got to get done. So it's not a perfect answer for you, actually. But, you know, it's the informational part that gets pushed to the side. When I'm slower, I could do a lot better in trying to play catch up on my messages. The email world has brought tremendous amount of information, but if you get so consumed into reading everything, you're not working, other than what you learn from the email information.
Yeah, thank you. And we appreciate you for taking your time to speak to all of us today. And Matt Luciano, he said, what is the main factor that keeps the projects flowing good?
So two things. One is vision of the real estate market, because again, a lot of what I review changes development rights. So it's a sense of confidence, either in a hot real estate market or a positive feeling for the future. That's from the private sector side. From the Department of City Planning, when they do these larger planning visions, what keeps them going is they have to have enough budget to have enough staff, and they have to have enough budget to do analysis. Sometimes they have to hire consultants. When I mentioned Gowanus, I mentioned polluted, right? So they have to hire consultants to do analysis in terms of how contaminated sites might be, because when you build, you want to make sure people are going to be healthy. And health is not just soil conditions, it could be noise conditions. So their budget needs to be healthy enough, right, to keep us busy. The city's ability to try to build affordable housing, because some of the sites need extra zoning so we could fit more housing on the site. Some of the sites just need, even though the city owns it already, they still need approval to dispose of a site to a private developer, whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit affordable housing developer.